Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here again. I'm going to say a couple of words and then keep my remarks short. And then Mayor de Blasio will have some remarks. And then, of course, Chief of Crime Control Strategies, Dermot Shea, even though he's not in uniform today, we'll go over February's crime numbers, and then we'll do Q&A. Just 3 years ago, we committed ourselves to being as transparent as possible, and we decided to do that regardless of whether the figures look good, maybe not so good, or flat. And we've held dozens of crime briefings since, and I think they're helpful, and I hope you feel the same way. You needed access to the ever-changing crime figures online, and you needed access to us sitting here so you can ask us your questions, delve deeper, and gain a full understanding and a full appreciation, most importantly, of how great our city continues to evolve and transform for the better. And similarly, we deserve the opportunity to provide you with the proper context to what the numbers mean. And for what I think the mayor thinks, and I think everybody up here thinks, continues to be an absolutely amazing effort on the part of all the hardworking men of the New York City Police Department. Your cops working with the community continue to drive down major crime. Gun violence continues to be reduced, and Dermot will talk about that. We attribute that to the NYPD's new way of conducting business. And our neighborhood policing efforts are a crime-fighting model of policing first and foremost. With the help of residents, workers, and visitors in New York City, we're doing an even better job, month after month, of identifying exactly who the real problem people are in our communities. Public safety is very much a shared responsibility, and I talk about that all the time. And together with the people in our varied and diverse neighborhoods, it's clicking, it's working. And you heard us talk about this before, and we're going to keep saying it. In reality, it's only a very small percentage of people in this city who are driving the bulk of violent crime. With precision policing, we're identifying those people, those groups, the small gangs and crews, and we're taking them out. And as you know, last year we conducted about 100 targeted takedowns, resulting in about 1,000 arrests, and most of them are still in. Many of these people are still locked up, which is exactly where they need to be. This is how we're reducing the number of shootings, the number of homicides, and this is how we continue to take guns off the streets. I want to thank Deputy Inspector Pete Fortune. He's the CO of the 114 Precinct for hosting us here today. I want to thank Assistant Chief Juanita Holmes from Patrol Bureau Queens North. Pete's cops, in particular, are doing great things with neighborhood policing and in taking guns off the street. All you have to do is look at the precinct's Twitter account to see that. The gun arrests are up 150% so far this year over last year. The raw numbers are 10 gun arrests versus 4, and we've only just started this year. Let's not minimize efforts like this. Those are firearms that will never be used to hurt anyone in New York City. Think of the lives potentially saved, the families kept intact. That's what the NYPD is dealing with every day. That's our mission, fighting crime and keeping people safe. And the men and women of the New York City Police Department do it better than anyone else. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Commissioner, congratulations. Congratulations to all the men and women of the NYPD. Congratulations to all the good officers of the 114 Precinct. We have another month of good news to report. Some very good things happened in February in terms of making this city safer. And you're continuing. I want to thank you, Commissioner, for your leadership, continuing to drive down crime. I want to, of course, thank Chief Gomez, Chief Boyce, all the leadership of the NYPD present, and also want to take an opportunity to thank the City Council, which has provided so much of the support we needed to make this happen. Thank you to the council member for this district, Councilmember Costa Constantinides. Thank you very, very much. We had one of the safest Februaries in the modern history of this city and of the NYPD. Overall crime down 9.7% in the major crime categories. And we are particularly proud of the continued reduction in shootings. You know, last year we set an all-time record for the fewest shootings in the history of New York City, below 1,000 shootings for the first time in our recorded history. Well, the NYPD continues to make deep progress on reducing shootings. Compared to a year ago, shootings are now down 35.5%, so that's extraordinary. This is about neighborhood policing, unquestionably. This is about the ability of the NYPD to deepen its relationship with neighborhood residents. A lot more information is flowing to the NYPD, allowing our officers to be more effective. That is one of the X factors here and why the city continues to get safer. Also happy to note that this week we saw the ratification by the PBA of the new contract. As you know, one of the important issues that was worked through around that contract process as we looked at other related issues was the issue of body cameras. And this is another step forward in the policy of bringing body cameras to all our patrol officers by the end of 2019. So that's some other very good news this week. Overall, we see, of course, you'll hear from Chief Shea the details and consistent reductions in crime with one notable exception. It is a slight uptick, but it obviously always worries us when there's any uptick in murders. The number went from 18 to 20 last February versus this. So we take that seriously, but overall, thank God, still a low number. I want to let you know this precinct in particular, a great example of neighborhood policing, what's happening in the 114, shows what the impact is of deepening the relationship between police and community. We have numbers that I think are impressive for this precinct for sure. Overall crime down 12.1% compared to February of 16. 0 murders, 0 shootings. So that's extraordinary, and I want to commend everyone in the 114 precinct. 0 murders, 0 shootings this year to date. Look, it's very gratifying for all of us to be able to come before you month after month and show progress, but there's not a hint of complacency. I have the honor of working with the leadership of the NYPD every single day. They are striving for more and more. They see this as a beginning, not an end. We have a lot more to do. We know the good news is all of the pieces being put into play keep having a positive cumulative effect. Neighborhood policing is deepening and growing. Our training efforts are having more and more impact on our officers. The new training facility that we announced a few weeks ago is going to have a very positive impact on our work. The additional protective gear we've put into play, the additional technology, all these pieces are adding up. And this month just passed, February, was only the second month where we had felt the full effect of 2,000 more officers on the streets. Again, thanks to the City Council and the excellent work that PD did in terms of civilianization as well. 2,000 more officers on the street today than just a couple of years ago. That's also an X factor that's going to have an increasingly big impact on our ability to reduce crime. So very, very appreciative, very proud of what the NYPD has achieved. Just want to say a few words in Spanish. El NYPD trabaja duro cada día para que Nueva York siga siendo la ciudad grande más segura del país. El mes pasado tuvimos un descenso récord en los tiroteos y fue uno de los febreros más seguros en los registros de la policía. No queremos ni un solo incidente de violencia armada. Vamos a seguir trabajando para mejorar la seguridad de todos en nuestra ciudad. With that, for all the details now, it's an honor to turn to Chief Dermot Shea.
Good afternoon, everyone. So we spoke last year several times. I talked about a momentum that was building within the NYPD and our crime-fighting efforts. And at that time, and several times publicly, I stated we were confident that we could push crime down even further. And what you're going to hear and see from some of these statistics and stories now is that we were right on mark. We're confident of that because of the resources, the training. We can see this, the ship of the NYPD is not easy to turn, but once it's headed in a direction, we have a lot of momentum on our crime-fighting efforts right now. A lot of things going very well. 40 shooting incidents recorded this past February. To give you an idea of where that stands, we've been tracking shooting incidents since 1994. When we looked at shooting incidents in 1994, we were looking at 300 to 400 a month, sometimes close to 500 a month. We recorded 40 this February. That's the lowest number for any month in those nearly 25 years that we've ever recorded in New York City. Staggering numbers. 40 versus 62, that's, as the mayor alluded to, a 35% reduction just this month. Significant decline in shooting incidents. Probably what's more important, though, is what I can't talk about. Some days we have no story. We had 9 days in February where in New York City, as in its entirety, we did not record a shooting incident, up from 6 last year. And as I alluded to this last month, This was unheard of just 2-3 years ago. Entire 24-hour periods without a shooting. In its entirety, when you look at crime in New York City for February, overall crime was down nearly 10%, 9.7%. Every borough of New York City, crime was down. Crime was down in housing. Crime was down in our transit facilities. When you look at individual crimes that stand out, I'll just highlight a few. Continuously, robberies, burglaries, and stolen vehicles are at levels that continue to push it even lower from where we've never seen before. We've recorded under 1,000 robberies in New York City in February. We've never been below 1,000 before. So really, across the spectrum, some impressive numbers. Murders. We recorded 20 murders during the month of February 2017, and that's up from 18. When you dig into those murders, 5 of them occurred from reclassifications, 2 from many years past, 3 from towards the end of last year. And again, these are contingent on death certificates coming in from Office of Chief Medical Examiner. One notable with the murders, we're seeing a pretty big decline in shooting homicides by gunfire. What we are seeing is blunt force trauma. We're seeing, we even had one by a vehicle that occurred within Queens, choking. Very confident that as we continue to push these shooting numbers down, that overall murder number as we move further into 2017 is going to be in the right category, if you will, because that is, at the end of the day, how we judge our success, the lives saved. And let me just finish with some statistics regarding our enforcement efforts. The police commissioner alluded to the gang takedowns of last year. This is not in a vacuum. At the same time, we are getting more and more precise with our partners, and I really can't say enough. From Brooklyn to the Bronx to the district attorney's offices, to Queens, Staten Island, to Manhattan DAs, our federal partners. We do not do this alone. I spent about 7 hours yesterday on a variety of topics with DA representatives from each of the 5 boroughs. How do we push crime further? Where are we succeeding? Where are there other areas where we can capitalize on? So when you look at these crime statistics and you talk about the precision of the violence takedowns, we are near 25-year lows in overall arrests in New York City. So that's the other side of that story. Precision on who's doing the crime. Criminal court summonses dramatically reduced, stops dramatically reduced, arrests near 25-year lows, and crime going definitely in the right direction.
All set. Okay, thanks, Dermot.
So we'll start with questions about crime, and then we'll transition to general police topics. All right, Mark?
Yeah.
Commissioner,
Hey, Mark.
here, it's the recent NCO command. There have been successes, obviously, in the other NCO precincts. What are your specific hopes for this community?
For Astoria, the 114, is that the crime will continue to go down and the police and the community will have better relations. This is what we're trying to do all over the city. We're up and running in 39 precincts now. We had a few added this week. I think Terry Monahan, we did the 10th precinct last night. We had a rollout. That's including all of the housing PSAs. So, you know, as we move through 2017 and this becomes ingrained in how we do our business, I think this is going to help us push crime down, especially the violence. And so far, the feedback we're getting from the community is great. I was out in Southeast Queens yesterday. Got a lot of positive feedback, and the feedback we're getting from the cops is great too. You know, they love having this ownership. They love having the opportunity to get familiarity with the people they're sworn to protect and serve. So I see this definitely going in a positive direction. Ozzie.
Councilman Dan Garodnick and Mezigit to the Chair of the Public Safety Committee introduced a bill, or presenting introduced a bill requiring more oversight for surveillance technology.
You say we're crime at the moment, if we can, okay, no, if anyone else on?
Hey, you know, I'll take care of that. Listen, I read it, and Commissioner Byrne is going to talk about it, but, you know, the way we do business, we try to be as transparent as possible, but this bill would not be helpful to anyone in New York City. Larry?
Yeah, Ozzie, we have reviewed the bill carefully with Councilman Garodnick. We oppose it strongly. We think it's a very bad idea. It would require us to disclose all sorts of confidential information about how these lawful surveillance techniques work. I imagine, and we don't believe that this bill will become law, but if we had to comply with this bill, the next issue of Inspire magazine that came out after it would be devoted to here are all of the technologies the NYPD uses to prevent terrorist attacks. Here's how you can disable these technologies. Here's how you can avoid these technologies. The only people who read Inspire magazine are terrorists or people who want to be terrorists or law enforcement who monitor it trying to prevent terrorism. This is a very misguided attempt. And I know of no police department or law enforcement organization or military unit in the United States that has this type of requirement imposed on them by law.
In the back.
I have a question about, I haven't seen the stats, but are we tracking hate crime-related incidents in the city? How are we doing with that compared to a year ago? And just yesterday, earlier this week, ACC has received another wave of calls. Is this, I mean, if you can keep us on it, is it something that we're talking about that's not actually happening, or is it something that?
Well, Bob Boyce is going to talk about the stats, and then Chief Gomez is going to talk about what we're doing about it. And each and every one of those threats that gets called in is investigated by either the Joint Terrorist Task Force or our Intelligence Bureau. And so far, with the 4 that we have, all of them have been unfounded. So,
But
Bob,
I just, before turning to the chief, I just want to say, I understand these are very, very unsettling. These threats are very troubling and unsettling to members of the Jewish community. And I want everyone who's concerned to know NYPD is highly focused, as it always is, in protecting all communities. But every threat fully assessed, and we will take appropriate measures if we find any validity in a threat. You'll hear the details of what's been found so far. But I understand, against a backdrop of growing numbers of anti-Semitic incidents all over this country and all over the world, which is a pattern that needs to be addressed profoundly. We're trying to do it here in this city with a very aggressive ability to stop hate crimes and to prosecute hate crimes and bias crimes. New York City is doing that whenever we have evidence. We need our federal government and all governments around the country to do that too, to make a very clear point that we will not accept anti-Semitism in this country. But the backdrop is worrisome because people, you saw what happened, the desecration of the cemetery the other day. This is becoming more widespread, and I've been very clear about an atmosphere of hate has been fostered in recent months in America, and we have to stop it.
Just to get to your statement, sir, really quickly. Hate crimes are up in this city. They're driven primarily by anti-Semitic hate crimes. Now, we're up 24 crimes versus last year, 55% increase from the start of this year. Anti-Semitic is up 94%, with 17 of those 24. So it's being driven by the anti-Semitic things we see. In particular, transit hate crimes, 16 versus 5. That's plus 11. Those are swastikas within the subway system. That's a problem for us. On a nationwide scale, we have 4 cases of bomb threats inside Jewish locations, 2 community centers, 1 museum, and of course the ADL in the 17th precinct. So we believe that's part of a nationwide pattern. We've spoken with the FBI in regards. Specific verbiage is used in each one, and we believe that's a bigger problem across the country than it is in New York. So we're working with the FBI in regards to that particular pattern.
and Chief Gomez will talk about the outreach and what we're doing.
Our field commanders are aware of this recent trend, and they've increased visits at these centers and places of worship. They're directing more of a police presence at these locations. In the commands that have neighborhood policing currently in place, this is one of them. The steady sector offices are visiting, as well as the neighborhood coordination offices, the community affairs offices, and in many cases the commanders themselves are visiting. We want to provide a sense of safety, reassure the centers that we're there. We're aware of what's going on, and the Passover holidays are only 5 or 6 weeks away. So we're going to continue this and actually increase it as we near Passover in April.
In the back row.
For both the commissioner and the mayor, Ed Mullen said a couple of days ago that he believes that most police officers on the force, if they had their preference, would want to be assisting with enforcing deportation. I'm wondering, based on the conversations you both have had with officers, whether you believe that's accurate and what you believe they.
I don't know what Ed is basing his informal survey on, because from what the feedback I get from police officers, they're interested in keeping all people in the city safe. And that's through traditional crime fighting. So I don't know what Ed's talking about.
Amen. I think it's quite clear that our job is to keep people safe in this city. If we create a separation between police and community, we're not going to be able to do it. Not only Commissioner O'Neill, but police leaders all over the country agree that our police officers cannot be put into that kind of federalized role. It would be counterproductive. And, you know, our job is to protect public safety.
David?
Just to build on that, I mean, have you noticed in the wake of the election and then the inauguration and some of this rhetoric, any difficulty, detectives getting witnesses to come forward, or any sort of cooperation in immigrant communities where there might be concerned, undocumented communities? I mean,
Of course, there's great concern, but I think with not only with neighborhood policing, but in all our precincts throughout the city, we have tremendous outreach. So we continue to build that trust. And Bob, unless you've seen something different, and I talk to Chief Boyce all the time, I'm not seeing that. I'm not seeing a hesitancy.
David, we haven't seen any reluctance for people to come forward that I've seen noticeable, and it's not gotten back to me. My detectives are able to get past anything just about we throw at them. So I haven't seen that at all.
And that's just case in point. That's exactly an example of why we should not change our approach, because people all over the city, going back to the Giuliani administration before, knew that if they talked to a police officer and they happened to be undocumented, they would not be asked their documentation status. That's so well established that it's an article of faith now all over the city. And I want to emphasize, we've got people in the city who are undocumented who have relatives who are permanent residents in this city or relatives who are citizens in this city. It's crucially important to the social fabric of the city and the safety of the city that people know if they talk to a police officer, they will not be asked documentation status. And it's so well understood that even against this backdrop, people believe in that guarantee.
In the back.
Following up on those previous questions, I know your administration has said, and the NYPD has said, that any arrests for minor offenses like fair beating poses no threat to undocumented immigrants, but lawyers and advocates say that that's not the case, and that now with the new directives that have been given to federal immigration officials, any undocumented immigrant who has been convicted of a minor offense, they're a priority for deportation.
I'll talk about what the NYPD does and what we have to do and how we got the city to the point where it is right now. If you listen to what Dermot said about crime being down, violence being down, we didn't get there by accident. There's a formula that we use. And with our precision policing, it's going down even further. So to answer your question, we have to continue to do that enforcement, whether somebody's a citizen or whether somebody's resident alien or whether somebody's undocumented, to continue to keep all people in the city safe.
So there are no plans to lighten up on going after minor offenses because of the fact that it might put an undocumented immigrant at the top of the...
You know, I've spoken to this several times. I'm going to try again. We believe in quality of life policing. We believe it's one of the reasons this city has gotten safer for a quarter century. And as you heard from the statistics today, we continue to get safer. We're not changing a formula. It works. And I understand some of the concerns that have been raised, but I think that, they're putting the cart before the horse. Job one is to keep people safe. And quality of life policing is part of keeping people safe. It's also demanded by neighborhoods all over the city. Quality of life policing is driven by 311 calls. It is the people asking the police to come in and address an issue. So we're going to keep doing that. But let's not confuse then the NYPD's role with federal immigration agents. We've made clear under our law when and how the city of New York will cooperate. In other areas, we simply won't because we're governed by our law. If ICE pursues someone, that's unfortunately, we don't always agree with them, but they're going to go do what they're going to go do. That's their choice. But the important point here is we have a law and we're governed by our law and we're comfortable with our law. Nothing going on now is changing our resolve to enforce quality of life policing.
And just hold on one second. And just to add to that, most of what we do in quality of life enforcement is driven by either criminal court summonses or civil summonses, such as the Transit Adjudication Bureau summonses, which is a civil summons.
So that sort of is my question. Has there been any additional directives given to err towards the side of civil penalties or admonishments or move-alongs, you know, the sort of peace dividend that Commissioner Bratton used to speak of? Has there been any additional guidance on that too?
That's part and parcel to what neighborhood policing is all about, putting the same people in the same sectors every day. So you get that familiarity. Not every piece of quality of life enforcement involves some sort of summary police action. We're encouraging our officers to use their discretion.
There was some controversy the other day about somebody being released from the system who had a misdemeanor arrest for biting the hand of a woman. But he also had a 2006 conviction for, I believe, assault as well. Does the fact that you've got a prior situation like that and something of a history of violence be something that the city ought to be giving more consideration to in terms of not just looking at that single offense?
I'll start and then pass to Larry Byrne. I'm not familiar with the details of that case, but I can say this. We are clear that 170 offenses in city law cover violent and serious crime very comprehensively. And there's clear stipulation in the law of what would then trigger our cooperation with ICE and how that would proceed. I've said repeatedly, we're looking to see if there's any categories we should add. We're continuing that process. That's a normal thing to do, in my opinion, when you're making policy, as things evolve, to look and see if there's any changes. But I am certain that we've gotten 170 offenses that are the right 170 offenses, at least to start, that really define what violent and serious crime is. And we then follow through in each instance based on the law. Larry?
Yeah, let me clarify, because there's still a lot of confusion about this. The City Council passed the law in 2014. The NYPD has been following that law strictly and the letter of the law since 2014. That law has two prongs as it relates to convictions and two prongs as it relates to being identified on a terrorist watch list or in a terrorist database. The first prong is if ICE presents a federal judicial arrest warrant based on probable cause from a federal judge or a magistrate judge, and the person has been convicted in the last 5 years of one of 170 offenses, that person is turned over to ICE. As a practical matter, in all cases where there's a federal judicial arrest warrant, whether there's an ICE detainer or not, that is a federal court order, which we and all law enforcement agencies honor. And so that person is being turned over to the federal agency that obtained the warrant, whether it's ICE, whether it's the FBI, whether it's the DEA, just as people honor our warrants all over the country. The second prong of the law, which you have to read, says if you've been convicted of one of the 170 felonies, and after you were convicted, you were deported from the country, and you re-entered the country illegally, we are entitled and indeed required under the law to notify ICE that we have a person fitting that criteria in our custody, and that we will hold that person for 48 hours for ICE to go and get an arrest warrant. It is a federal crime to re-enter the country illegally after you've been deported. If ICE shows up with an arrest warrant, that person will be turned over. If ICE chooses not to get the arrest warrant in the 48 hours, we are required under the law to release that person. Once we release the person, what ICE does to enforce its federal criminal and civil immigration laws is ICE's business. Our releasing the person doesn't prevent ICE from picking the person up, as it did in the instance you referenced. ICE did pick that person up, just we did not hold them because, frankly, ICE had sent the detainer to the wrong place and we didn't have it. But we have to follow the law, and those are the two prongs of the law that relate to criminal convictions.
Juliet?
Your thoughts on the North Carolina congressman's idea to make gun licenses like driver's licenses and usable throughout the country?
I think vehicles are a little different than weapons. We don't need any more guns in New York City. I'm not in favor of it. I think the nation should look to New York State and New York City as a model of reducing gun violence. So I'm not in favor of that.
Yeah, it's a very reckless proposal, and it would endanger countless New Yorkers. And to amplify the commissioner's point, all over the country we have seen these horrible massacres where people got their hands on not just weapons, very high-grade weapons, including people who had mental health problems and all sorts of other indicators that they may unfortunately have poor judgment using a weapon. And here we now have people in elected office saying, let's loosen up the rules further. Let's make it easier to get weapons still. What they should look at is what's happening here in New York City, where we're tough on guns and it makes people safer. It's as clear as that. 25 years almost of success, 25 years of continued progress on safety because we have tough gun safety laws. So if those kind of proposals pass, you're going to have a less safe country. It's as clear as that.
Given a Republican Congress and a strong gun lobby, what do you think the likelihood is of that?
I don't handicap each piece of legislation. I will say the Senate, of course, is almost evenly split. And I think there's a lot of people in the Senate who understand how dangerous it would be to make guns even more widely available. And there's a lot of advocates out there who are from the families who lost loved ones in these massacres who will be all over Capitol Hill, making clear that if those members of Congress make it easier for people to get guns, then whatever happens next is on them. So I think the Senate will be very careful in considering anything like that.
Hey, Juliet, just to add to that, we have some of the strictest gun laws in the nation in New York City. If you just take a look at some of the major crimes that have occurred, and specifically some of our police officers that have been shot and killed, those guns have come from out of state. So I am not in favor of anything that allows more guns to be brought into New York City. Tony?
A little while ago, you talked about the positive feedback you're getting from the rank and file officers and the public on community policing. You were trying to get a survey done. Are you any further along in doing that for surveying the rank and file?
Yeah, we are. We are, and I don't want to ruin my next press conference, but you know, we're close. We've been working with some people, with some consultants on building that survey instrument, so that should be up and running in some form or fashion within the next month. I think I owe you, right? Yeah.
What do you think are the upsides and downsides of President Trump's new Victims of Immigrant Crime Engagement Program? And does the NYPD currently share any statistics about undocumented offenders with the Department of Homeland Security?
Larry, I'm going to toss that one over to you.
We have an extensive crime victim outreach program. It's not dependent on whether you're an immigrant or a U.S. citizen. If you're a victim of a crime, we're reaching out to you to work with you to solve the crime, to provide you with the necessary city services. Doesn't turn on your citizenship or your immigration status. We do not, when we take statements from crime victims and when we arrest criminals, record immigration status, nationality. We record identification information for purposes of prosecuting the case or staying in touch with the victim. So we're following the practice we've followed for decades. This is nothing new. It's not a change in policy at the NYPD. We're working to help crime victims and track down criminals without regard to immigration status.
What do you think are the upsides and downsides?
I haven't studied President Trump's program. I'm familiar with what the NYPD does. And the upside of the NYPD program is what you heard today, the lowest crime month in 25 years and the lowest shootings in 25 years. So we're doing something right here in New York.
Let me add, this is clearly an act of scapegoating by the president. He is attempting to demonize immigrants. And you know, look at the experience we've had here in this city. Look at how little violence we have now compared to what we used to have. Look at how cooperation with immigrant communities help to reduce crime. Look at how few undocumented people commit any serious crime here in New York City, even though there's 500,000 undocumented folks here. This is very clearly an effort by the president to create alarm, to create a negative impression of immigrants, because it serves his political purposes. So, you know, when I saw that, I thought that was just an overt political play to continue to worry people all over the country about danger from immigrants in their midst, where, as I said a moment ago, when you look at those horrible massacres that have occurred around the country, you can get a whole list of them out here in college campuses and movie theaters. Tell me how many of those people were undocumented immigrants. I think you'll find either very few or none, who committed those horrible acts of violence.
Hey, Ozzy, I'm going to get to you, but I want to get to some people that haven't asked a question. I think you had something over here on the left.
Yeah. On Friday, a deputy commissioner said that no one is getting deported for jumping a turnstile. Several legal advocates have said since then that that is absolutely the case, that people are being arrested by ICE based on 2 crimes of moral turpitude. People are being deported entirely based off arrest and charges for low-level offenses given to them by the NYPD. Is New York City a true sanctuary city if that's what's getting them deported?
Yeah, I was that deputy commissioner, and it's important that you quote me correctly, as Ozzy did when he wrote the story. What I said was, if you get arrested for turnstile jumping, you're not getting deported because of the arrest, and that's true. Why is that? Because when we arrest someone for turnstile jumping, and understand, the first 3 times you jump a turnstile, you get a tab summons, a civil summons. So ICE has no record that you've been given a summons. The 4th or the 10th time that you jump a turnstile, whether you're a legal immigrant, an illegal immigrant, or a U.S. citizen, you're getting arrested for the misdemeanor of theft of services. You're getting fingerprinted, and ICE becomes aware that you're in our custody. Turnstile jumping is not one of the 170 offenses where we would honor a detainer. So we would not be turning that person over to ICE, and we would not be giving ICE notification of that. So that's very clear. As for C summonses, when you get a C summons for any offense that qualifies, public urination, open container of beer, you don't even get fingerprinted. So ICE has no notice that you've gotten the summons. And by the way, all summonses in our system, even ones that result in people pleading guilty, are sealed. They're sealed records. So no one's getting put into ICE custody because they got a summons for an open container of beer. The one case that was referenced was very misleading because it talks about a 1996 conviction, guilty plea for turnstile jumping. The second offense, that individual in 2000, 4 years later, had been convicted of the serious felony of committing a violent sodomy and was sentenced to 7 years in prison. If the federal authorities want to deport someone on the basis of a violent sodomy, that would be one of our 170 qualifying felonies. And that person probably should be in jail, whether he's an illegal alien or a U.S. citizen, and then deported if he's here illegally.
Sir, could you clarify for us a memo that was apparently issued to the patrol force with respect to firing on vehicles?
So, and again, this is something that I've spoken about numerous times. We have to pay attention to not only what goes on in New York City or in the country, we have to pay attention to what goes on in the world. So we took a look at some of the attacks across the world, and we saw that there is not a deficiency, but there's something we needed to correct within our policies and procedures. And we saw that with vehicle attacks, we have a prohibition against shooting at moving vehicles unless something other than the vehicle is being used as a deadly weapon. We saw that might be misinterpreted by some of our police officers. The reality of it, if there was an attack, I don't think there'd be any hesitancy by any New York City police officer to fire at that vehicle. But we just wanted to make sure that we made that correction, and then if it does happen, that the police officers feel that we have their back and that procedure was changed. And if any legal issues come out of it, we've changed our procedure to make it right.
So simply put, sir, if you don't mind, what
That was too long? That was too long?
Pass it to Terry.
Sorry.
Let's try that again. Take two. Take two.
Yeah, and I've never been accused of that before.
So what,
Yeah.
so what is the message then to the patrol force?
The message to the patrol forces, if as they're out there doing their jobs and there is, God forbid, an attack, that they can use deadly force against that vehicle.
I just want to add, Commissioner and I have talked. You were great the second time. The
Doing it too long.
Commissioner and I talked about this at the time after we saw the attack in Berlin and obviously the previous attack in Nice. One of the things I've experienced in the last 3+ years is the extraordinary capacity of NYPD to look at what's happening around the world and make adjustments. And it's a constant reality, right? We've seen so much in recent years, and I don't think we've ever seen a time frame in our history that compares to the last few years in terms of terrorist organizations trying new approaches and therefore requiring us to be more vigilant and make major adjustments. You saw it with how we handled the Macy's Thanksgiving Parade. You saw it with how we handled New Year's Eve, for example. So I think this is part of the natural process of looking at what's happening and being ready to make those strategic adjustments because we have to protect people. Now, one of the things that's clear is officers are obviously going to be very careful and judicious in using that capacity. But when you think about scenarios like we've seen in Berlin and Nice, if a truck is speeding toward an officer or a checkpoint or a place of importance in this city in an unusual pattern, that's unfortunately a strong indicator of something going on that may be terrorism. We're not talking about everyday life in New York City. We're talking about things that are out of the ordinary and unfortunately would conform with those patterns we've seen around the world.
Just on the mayor and the police commissioner's point on restraint, if you look at 2016, New York City police officers on and off duty discharged their firearms 72 times. That included accidental shootings, unfortunately, some officer suicides, shooting at animals. We're one of the most restrained departments in the country when it comes to discharging firearms.
Just NJ, as a last point, that with that finest message and the email that went out to all of our police officers, there's a training module with that also. So we just didn't send it out. There's a training package there too.
Yeah, just one more point. I want to go back to Larry's point. I want you to emphasize that. That's all of 2016, city of 8.5 million people, 365 days, 36,000 cops. Say the numbers again of how many times firearms were discharged.
72 firearms discharges, including accidental, unfortunately, some officer suicides, shooting at violent animals, dogs, and adversarial shootings with people committing crimes.
The back.
To what extent are body cameras mentioned in the recently ratified contract that the PBA
to the extent that once that the program starts, there'll be I guess an added percentage for police officers wearing body cameras.
Does it require that body cameras be done by 2019 in the actual contract, or that's just the understanding outside?
It permits it. It permits it. It doesn't require it. Right. So in other words, the city and the NYPD now have the ability, if everything else is in place, to require, with their agreement, all members of the PBA to wear body cameras when they're on duty. And the goal, as the mayor and the police commissioner have said, is to have all of those officers wearing body cameras by the end of 2019.
Are you on track for that deadline?
Too early to tell. The next phase of the program is the 1,000-camera pilot program that will be done under supervision of the federal court and the monitor. We want to do this as quickly as possible, but in a responsible way.
Down Troy Avenue. Chief Boyce will talk about that.
Presently, the cause of death for that woman has been determined strangulation. There was some blunt force trauma to her head, but that was not the cause of death. It was strangulation. Right now, it's a forensic investigation. We have no eyewitnesses. We did speak in length to her husband. Her estranged husband happens to live in the same house. There was some talk in the paper about some gambling devices downstairs. That doesn't appear to play a role in this at all. So no prior DIRs between husband and wife, yet we got the call around 9:30 in the evening. Family members spoke to her about 7 o'clock in the evening, so we have that window that we're looking at right now. We're still quite a bit away from making an arrest in this case, but going forward, we did speak to the husband at length. And right now, we have a lot of forensics we have to get back before we move forward. I'm sorry? Right now, he is the only one in the house, so not to do that would be foolish. But again, we're waiting for the forensics to come out to build our case. Pardon me? Nothing taken from this home. Not that we discovered.
Police Commissioner, is there any information you can share about an arrest made for the 1999 murder of Elsa Ruan in the Bronx?
That's a cold case arrest. Chief Boyce can talk about that too.
Sure. Detectives from the 4-4 Detective Squad this happened March. This just didn't happen. We've been working this case since March, about a year now, since March 6th, I believe, from last year. We got a DNA hit from the victim where it occurred. We were able to identify this person from that. We then spoke with the Bronx DA, and we did some other things, some other investigative steps to build the case, which we did. We were able to put him inside that building at various times in that time frame. So DNA evidence recovered from the victim. This was a rape and stabbing. She was stabbed numerous times, found by her son-in-law. We were able to identify this person through DNA evidence. He was not in the original case, originally. So we had a lot of work to do to build a case on that. We made the arrest this past week. Great job by the 4-4 detectives and the Bronx Homicide Squad.
We allow these people to step aside, please, right now, and then the mayor will continue, all right? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
See you. I'll be in the
Thank you. That was excellent.
Yes.
Oh, wonderful.
Marsh credit.
Oh my God, body kills. Yeah.
Tidying up, very nice. Now you always leave it nicer than you found it, right? Okay, it's showtime. Ozzy.
Just to follow up on a police-related question, if the number of undocumented residents that commit crimes is so low, why not have those numbers come out and sort of use that to disprove the president's overall growth?
I think that's a good point. I think that, look, I think we're all still catching up with the reality created by President Trump and how to talk about everything that we're experiencing. I think that's a really fine point, that the facts are, and I've been over this with Commissioner O'Neill, undocumented folks are not only like everybody else, you know, they're family people living their lives like everyone else. The vast majority of them don't do anything that comes to the attention of law enforcement, but in fact, from the commissioner's experience, they are less likely to commit crime. So I think it would be very good for us to do more to show the actual numbers. I think it would be surprising to people in this city and beyond to see how few crimes are committed by undocumented folks. When someone does commit a crime, we're going to follow through on that very aggressively with all the tools of NYPD, and we've made very clear how we relate to ICE. But I think the national debate has been a fact-free zone. You know, Donald Trump said in one of his very first speeches, he claimed, you know, Mexicans coming to this country were rapists and criminals. And that set the tone from the beginning. And there's been very little that challenged those sort of assumptions as he proceeded. So I think it's very important, and it's incumbent on us to show the facts to really turn the tables on this discussion. Okay, anyone over here? All right, let's go over here, David.
In your homelessness plan, the goal that you set for yourself of reducing the homelessness population of the shelters by about 500 a year is seen, and you presented it this way as well, as kind of being real with what's possible. Do you see this as sort of a move or a shift in your mind towards a kind of pragmatism in your administration, or sort of the results of having been there for 3 years and now seeing what is possible and what isn't?
I don't think it's been I don't think it's a shift to pragmatism. I think we've been very pragmatic on all of our numerical goals. In other words, if you think about our affordable housing plan, you think about our pre-K plan, you know, just go down the list of things where we put forward numerical goals. We had a pretty consistent template. We were going to stretch as far as we could, but we had to actually believe we could hit the number. And I'm happy to say we've been able to hit the number in the vast majority of things we've undertaken. Not always. Obviously, with Build It Back, we didn't hit the number we wanted to. But on the biggest initiatives, you know, affordable housing plan is ahead of schedule. Pre-K was a very dramatic effort, managed to hit it on the nose on time. So I think this is 3 years of hard work that led us to the realization that we had to take a very different approach. Then when we ran the numbers over and over again, and not just with Department of Social Services and Commissioner Banks, but OMB served as a check and balance, running numbers all the time too to see what they came up with independently. And we recognized that what we had was an incrementalist approach. It would have been wonderful to be able to offer, you know, a huge numerical victory up ahead, but that just wasn't real. So I would argue this issue, first of all, it took us a lot of trial and error, a lot of experience to fully understand not only how complex it was, but how we were playing from behind from the day we walked in the door, that the numbers were surging and the agencies weren't situated properly, the policies weren't in place. We had lost advantage, obviously, a few years earlier. I think it took us a good long while to totally understand everything we had to change and then recognize that the actual structure itself wasn't working because people were being sent to the wrong places. Then when we added all that into the equation, said, okay, what can we do to the number? That 2,500 decrease was what we thought was real. Yeah.
On the homelessness plan, and I see the commissioners here.
Yes, he's sitting there. And he can come up even if he wants to.
He looks like he wants.
He wants to, don't you think so? I think he wants to. He just happened, he was just in the neighborhood and he happened by.
I was wondering if you could say more about what you mean by fair share in terms of the homeless
Sure.
plan. I just crunching some numbers back of the envelope, like Manhattan, 16% of the city's homeless people come from Manhattan, yet Manhattan has 19.4% of the facilities. Bronx has 47% of the facilities, but 38% of the population, so on and so forth. What's going to happen there? Is would the number of facilities in the Bronx come down to match the percentage of people?
Can I suggest people, think in terms of people before facilities first would be productive. Let me explain. We want to see each, let's think community board, and let's think about borough. Those are two really good measures. Each borough have the capacity for people from that borough. Each community board have capacity for people from that community board. I think that's the simplest way to think about it. You know, you might have enough capacity for everyone who comes from your community board in a single building, or it might take several buildings. The building might be a little bit of a less exact measure. The question really is number of beds and number of people you can accommodate. But what we want to do over the time frame we've laid out is actually rationalize it. So in any community, people know, here's roughly the number of people from our community in the shelter system, and we are going to take responsibility for that amount of capacity to accommodate people from our neighborhoods.
Envision something where there's what if a community board doesn't have any homeless people from it? Would you not consider citing a new shelter there?
Literally every community board in the city, every community district, every area of the city has people in the shelter system from that area. And just to amplify the mayor's answer, when you look at buildings rather than people, you have the distortion of a system that's built up for several decades. So use of clusters, for example, would lead potentially to a high number of buildings, not necessarily great outcomes for the people in those buildings or for the communities in which they're located. So what's most important for us to look at is use the same strategy, frankly, we used in implementing Homestat. Case by case, person by person, make a difference by being able to keep individuals in a stable setting, and that's going to drive where we need to have either beds for individual people or units for families.
So let me just follow through the question further. So let's say a community board, which is a big, there's 59 community boards, so it's a pretty big part of the city. I think if I'm doing my math right, it's 200,000 people plus. The community board, let's say it has 50 people in recent times, because you wouldn't take it just a measure of a single day. You'd look over a recent period of years. Capacity for 50 people. Again, that could be one building. Then let's say a year later, there's no one from that community board, and that is sustained. That's fantastic. Then we would turn that building into something else, for example, supportive housing or affordable housing. Part of what's great about the facilities that we're talking about, creating new facilities, is we're going to create them in a flexible manner so they can be converted to permanent use if there's no longer a need. Look, the long-term goal, which to David's point, I'm being very sober about the numbers, but we would love to get to a point where we could have a consistent contraction of the shelter system. What we would then be able to do is turn these buildings into something permanent that would serve other needs. Okay? Yeah.
On Monday, you said that you've lobbied city agency heads on behalf of...
I never said I lobbied, so don't use words I didn't use.
spoken on behalf of.
You didn't speak on behalf of. I'm not going to accept anyone else's characterization.
Well, let me ask you this then. Which donors have you gone to agency heads on behalf of to make the case?
Look, I've spoken to all of these issues repeatedly. I spoke to them at great length on New York 1 the other night. There's obviously an investigation going on. I want to respect that investigation. I have nothing more to add. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me get Marcia and those. We'll come back to you, David. Let's get people who haven't gone yet.
I'm wondering why Ricardo Morales, who was the manager of Decastle Code Rivington, was fired several hours after you testified and you talked to federal authorities. And I wondered if you could share with us how you felt when you were being questioned by these federal prosecutors for those 4.5 hours. And can you tell us how you felt?
Marcia, all I'll say is I felt fine. It was a perfectly fine discussion, and as you know, a voluntary one, and we will continue to cooperate. As simple as that. On the personnel decision, that was a decision made by the relevant people in my administration. I didn't have anything to do with the timing or how they went about it. Did you know about it? I had heard that it was coming, but I had no idea of how and when. Again, I'm not getting into the details of an agency decision making. I thought whatever the agency leaders wanted to do made sense. Aaron?
A poll that came out today says that 57% of New Yorkers think that it's an ethical problem that you're planning to collect donations for your legal defense. Wondering what you think about that, and also if you've made any more decisions. Last week you said you weren't ready to commit to not accepting donations for that fund from people.
Again, I'm not value judging. Don't have a plan yet. We will have a plan at some point. We'll obviously talk about that plan we have. We just don't have it. So, it takes real resources to cover legal bills. As I've said many times, not a millionaire or billionaire. We'll figure out a plan and we'll deal with it then.
Okay, as far as people thinking it's an ethical problem?
I don't know how you can think it's an ethical problem if you haven't seen what it is.
I have a homelessness question, but if you'll allow it after this one. Going back to the Friday interview, without going into specifics, were there things presented to you that you were not aware of that made you say, wow, or something, I wish that my aides or my associates had not done that?
I'm going to say two things. One, I'm certainly not going to talk about the details of the interview. It's an investigatory process. I want to respect that. Two, the entire time this conversation going on, let's say roughly a year, not a single thing has changed my view throughout about what I've said to you guys repeatedly. We've handled things appropriately, ethically, within the law. Very comfortable that things were handled the right way, but I'm not going to talk about the details of that discussion on Friday.
So do you basically feel that this is sort of a wild goose chase, your 2013?
Not going to characterize it.
Okay.
Just not. It's just, it is what it is, and we're going to keep doing our work.
On homelessness,
he had a second one. Go ahead.
Sorry, the issue of NYCHA units was brought up by Coalition for the Homeless after your announcement. Why not dedicate more NYCHA units for homeless people?
That is a long-standing theme of the coalition. I have great respect for the coalition, and people used to be their lawyer as well. But I have set a very clear policy. I believe in it fundamentally. We use NYCHA units judiciously to address some of the challenge we face. But I've always believed that the fact that we have a huge wait list, tens of thousands of people waiting to get into NYCHA, who have waited their turn for a long time, that has to be respected. And so that's the primary way you get into NYCHA apartments. Obviously, there are some other very urgent needs, like domestic violence. That is another thing we focus on in terms of NYCHA apartments. But we're not going to be adding any more NYCHA apartments to the pool. And look, what we now have, and this is, I think we would all agree that I was not attempting happy talk yesterday at this speech, but I can say we have a little bit of progress on the numbers in shelter, and I want to thank the commissioner's team. That was hard-won victory to get that little bit of progress. But the projections are what I'm focused on now, because we have gone over them and gone over them and gone over them again. We believe this is accurate. That's going to allow us to systematically, over time, get out of the clusters. As we said, we've been out of 44 buildings already. We intend to get out of 40 more this year. I've been real clear, we're not going to make any major moves out of hotels yet, but I'd love it if we never have to add new hotels. That will be, again, we'll have to see things play out to know for sure. But we will be steadily adding the new facilities. And that's going to allow us more capacity. So right now, that is, from my point of view, the guarantee we need to know we will have a place for people who need it. And then we hope to, surpass this plan in terms of keeping people out of shelter and getting people more quickly from shelter to permanent housing. Okay, who has that? Juliet.
Mr. Mayor, did the federal prosecutors indicate to you that they wanted another opportunity to speak with you again, or that might come up?
Again, I'm not going to go into details. It was, we went through the time we had. It's a fine conversation. I'm not going to speak for them. Anyone who hasn't gone yet? Yeah.
Homeless issue. There was such a fight in places like Maspeth. How do you expect people in the 5 boroughs to be so willing to go along when this one smaller community fought back so loudly?
Look, I want to be careful on the word community. There were a group of people who fought back, and again, someone has to help me with my math on a community board district. 59 times 200 and something, right? It's like whatever it is. It's a large, large community. The fact is, there are 250 people who come from Maspeth who are in our shelter system right now. And I don't know how a community can say, here are our own neighbors who ended up homeless, someone else should take care of them. That makes no sense. I think it's fair to say to every community, do your fair share. If you're a community that has a lot of folks who ended up homeless, 1, help us, help your neighbors. 2, we want them to get back on their feet. And if they're near their house of worship, their family, their school, there's been a lot of concern about kids having to go to school a borough or 2 away. Why on earth would we keep doing that? So we will go back into that community board that Maspeth's a part of. If people want to work with us to find the best and most appropriate location, we'd really appreciate that. If they don't, we'll do our best to find the right location. But every community has to do their fair share. Anyone who hasn't gone yet? Grace?
Are there any changes you have made or are planning to make in your fundraising and political activities as a result of these investigations and your conversation on Friday with federal prosecutors? Even though I know you've said repeatedly that you've done nothing wrong, but anything going forward, maybe conversations after you speak with a donor saying, I'm not going to make that phone call to a city agency, or I'm not going to put that on somebody's plate?
Again, I just have to keep it very general. I think we've done things the right way. And I'm comfortable with the way we're handling things now. Yeah.
Do you see an ethical distinction with putting items on the table as a city council member, as a public advocate, and now as the mayor, or is it all the same for you?
Again, I'm not going to deal with a hypothetical in this case. I can simply say I've gotten a lot of ethics training in my day, and I honor it. And as I've said to you guys many times, you're not going to find a lot of people in the executive branch historically who sought conflict of interest board guidance as often as we did, nor disclosed where they didn't have to by law the way we did. Very comfortable with the way we've done things. I'm very comfortable with the way I handle conversations.
In what ways, when I ask the hypothetical, you're the mayor right now, and you help.
I'm just talking to you about, I'm not talking about a generic. I'm very comfortable with the way I'm doing things. There's my generic answer to your generic question.
2 more questions. So Ricardo Morales, when he was the head of DCAS, when he was deputy commissioner at DCAS, had played a role in both the Rivington issue, but actually he was much more involved in the lease negotiation over the Water's Edge restaurant that was owned by one of your donors, friend Precinct. Now I'm wondering, just sort of 2 parts. One is, what was the reason that he was fired on Friday? What's the cause that precipitated his firing? And then what did you know about his involvement in sort of being a roadblock to Herendra's efforts to try and get that lease renegotiated?
I'm not going to go into the specifics of that situation, and I don't know many specifics of that situation. The folks in charge, the commissioner at DCAS who reports to the first deputy mayor, they make personnel decisions all the time. They made a personnel decision. That's what I know.
You don't know the reason for why he was fired?
I believe they thought that they needed someone better to do that job, but you can refer that question to them and they can explain in more detail. Okay, last call. Yes.
Back in the summer, we reported on donors affiliated with Broadway Stages and Gina Argento who gave to your campaign. We talked to these folks. Some of them said they had no knowledge of substantial donations to your campaign. time when we asked you about this, you said the campaign would look into it. We still have not received any outlook on what actually the campaign came back with. Can you say with certainty now that those donations were legitimate?
Yeah, I don't know what the campaign has done since that time, so we'd have to check that. I just know whenever a concern is raised, we look into it and we take appropriate action, and there are many lawyers involved. Okay, again, I'm just telling you what I know. Go ahead, last call.
Homelessness. Did you talk with your budget director or others about more money that could be infused into rental subsidies? I know you backed Assemblymember Hevesey's plan. If the state doesn't pass that, are you looking at ways to flood more money into subsidy programs?
I think the problem is, and Steve may have a view on this as well, we've put together a budget in the preliminary budget, not yet knowing what the Trump administration would do on a host of issues. We're going to know more, obviously, in the coming weeks, but it doesn't look good. The kinds of tax cuts for corporations and the wealthy he's talking about, and the other cuts he's talking about in terms of revenue, and then if he's going to intensify military spending, with this Congress that is going to constantly want some kind of compensatory cut for any increase, suggests there's going to be really negative cuts on affordable housing, education, mass transit, things that deeply affect New York City. So I'm not going to be making major new spending in an area when I don't know if I can sustain it. There may be a few very targeted things that we have to do, but on something like that, opening up a whole new subsidy program, that's not my impulse right now. But more importantly, the state should be at the table. There's been talk of a housing MOU since last June that has not become specific in any way. We don't have any details on the supportive housing plan. We need help to really get more people out of homelessness. And Assemblyman Hevesey's proposal is a really good way for the state to become a fuller partner in addressing homelessness and for the state to take some responsibility. So I think that's the right way to go. Thanks, everyone.
Tell us why Ricardo Morales was fired.
I've covered it. Thank you.
But you didn't cover it.
Well, I did.
You didn't say anything?
There you go.